Hi, California politics students. Sorry I can't be there today. Zachary here is really sick this morning, and so I thought it would be better if I stayed home with him and not bringing him to campus to share his drums with you. So instead, I want to point out a few things in chapter 1 that I want to make sure there will be some coughing. I want to point out a few things from chapter 1 that I want to make sure you're on top of, and we'll talk about them some more when I come back next week, but I don't want us to fall too far behind. So one of the parts about California politics that chapter 1 points out on page 3 is about what makes California so interesting, that we're so diverse, that we have such a large economy, and that we have so many people. And there's this kind of throwaway line about the undercount in the census, and that's something that I'd like you to go look at in the news. You can probably find some testimony that's been going on about this. The state's constitution requires that everybody conduct a census every 10 years, so the next census will be in 2020. And the Trump administration has asked that a question be added to the census that tells you the immigration status of everyone in the household. This is unusual. It has been asked before in the census, but it hasn't been in there for a long time. And the concern is that if this question is asked, people will decline to answer the census or will just not list members of their household who are of undocumented status or just are not citizens, which would lead to a severe undercount in communities of color. And if there is an undercount, then California might lose a seat in the House of Representatives, will lose money because money that comes from the United States government is based on these census population numbers. And so there's a lot of concern that adding this citizenship question to the census is going to generate a severe undercount that's going to hurt California politically and economically. And so I'm going to ask you to read something about that and to know a little bit more about that. The other thing from the chapter that we want to talk about is just the extreme diversity of California, or the hyper diversity of California, that we are really much more diverse than any other state. And I talked about this a little bit on Monday, but that's also something that leads to some of our political struggles and some of our challenges as a state, is that it's really often very hard for us to come to agreement on anything because there are so many different points of view. And so that's something about California that we're going to keep in mind all semester. What else do I want to make sure you're paying attention to? Want to make sure, following up on Monday, that we're paying attention to these really massive changes that have been made to California in the last few years. The switch to the top 2 primary system for conducting elections, the switch to a citizens redistricting commission, which means that lines are drawn by a nonpartisan group or a multi-partisan group instead of to protect incumbents or with partisan aims in mind. That's very significant. That, I'm not sure that the book makes this clear. That was passed by citizen initiative. That is something that legislators resisted because, of course, legislators enjoy drawing the lines to create their own districts. Then they can choose their voters. But now voters are more able to choose their representatives. And so the redistricting commission is huge. The top 2 vote getter system is huge. And then also the reform to budgeting that allows for a majority vote for a budget instead of 2/3, which on the one side means that we're less likely to have budget crises and gridlock because majority rule is much easier. On the other hand, it means that the minority voice in California is then much less powerful. And for us, that means Republicans are much less powerful. It used to be that Democrats in Sacramento would have to negotiate with at least a couple of Republicans to get them to sign on to the budget in order to get to that 2/3. Now, often Democrats don't need any Republicans at all. So those are the 3 huge reforms: top 2 vote getter, redistricting commission, and majority budgeting. And those are huge, and they've had huge impacts on California. And they are partly why we've gone from being a state that's often in crisis and with structural deficits to a state with a pretty robust rainy day fund looking to expand services and expand infrastructure in ways that we couldn't even have imagined a decade ago. All right, so those are the highlights of the chapter that I want you to be aware of. I'll post some things for you to read and think about, and I'll see you next week.